Let's take a look at how to incorporate rounding and absolute references in our analysis. The first thing we're going to do is take a look at rounding with decimal places. So if I take these numbers up here, and let's select this entire section with Control, Shift, down, and right arrows, and using Alt H0 we can add decimal places. So what we'll see here is that particularly in this weighted average section, we have a lot of decimals here. Let's take a look at how we can use the round function to change the number of decimal places. So first off, if I want to round off the weighted average, in the first case I want to have it to, let's say, 4 decimal places. Well, I see that I get the same numbers up above because that is only showing 4 decimal places. Now, if I want to change that to be 3 decimal places, you can see that the last number is rounded off to 0. We can also make it 2 decimal places. Let's make it 1 decimal place. And finally, you can actually make this a 0 as well. So showing to no decimal places. So this can be very useful if you want to show a long string of decimals but round them off, or if you just want the numbers to be rounded in the background for calculations, actually, for math. So that's a very useful way to adjust the number of decimal places. But what if you don't want to show something with decimal places? What if you actually want to round before the decimal? So let's take a look at how to do that. And I'm just going to remove some of the decimal places here to go back to our original formatting. So this is 29,677. And let's think about how we could round this. You might want to round this all the way up to the nearest thousand. So it might actually just become 29,000 even. Let's look at how to do that. So this function is called mRound, and m just stands for multiple. So we're going to round this number here to the nearest 1,000. So just type in 1,000 and close bracket. So now it's 29,000. We could round it to the nearest 100. We could round it to the nearest 10. Or we could round it to the nearest dollar, which is the same as when we did the decimal places to 0 with the regular round function. So they overlap at this point. And we could also make it even. Let's go bigger and say to the nearest, if we went as big as the nearest 100,000, then you see we'd get 0, of course, because it rounds it all the way down. So depending on what you want, if the nearest 10,000, then we get 30,000 as an output. So this can be very useful if you want to take some numbers and make them round for either output or for calculation purposes. If I take this number and multiply it by 10, you can see that I get 300,000, which is very different than if I take this number and multiply it by 10. So you can actually see how you would use this to change the way math flows through in a model if you wanted to be rounding every step of the way. Could be very powerful, and it could also be used just for output in terms of formatting. So this is some very useful analysis that we can do. And one other function that I want to show you is the absolute function. So let's suppose, for example, that I was showing my expenses as negative numbers, which is common practice in a lot of cases. Or for example, I had a cash balance or some other number that went negative. In my calculations, I may want to have an absolute reference so that I want this number to be shown as a positive. So I can use the absolute function to do that. And in some later examples, we're going to use the absolute function where we want to show in sensitivity analysis the plus and minus impact of a change from an assumption. We're going to use absolute function to align that, and I'll show you a bit later. So absolute is also a powerful tool. So I'm just going to change these back to be 1 decimal place using Alt H9. So now our formatting is right back in place.